Before we begin, please tell us what city you're from. Subscribe, like, and watch until the end. Here we go. Run! Run faster! Greg choked out, ducking a branch engulfed in flames. He couldn't see his buddy's face through the acrid smoke anymore, but he knew David was close. The fire advanced like a wall, scorching dry moss and leaves. The air was a cauldron of soot and ash. Thoughts raced through his mind. How did this happen? Why did the fire grow so powerful? Where is the rain? But no rain came. The smoke suffocated the vast forests of the Pacific Northwest. Animals fled wherever they could. Greg heard their panicked cries, roars, and the thud of hooves. "Greg, over here!" David emerged from the pale haze. His face showed terror, but also determination. The forest burned so fiercely it felt like the very earth was cracking beneath their feet. They had to get to the wetlands. It was damp there, a chance the fire wouldn't cross. And perhaps they could find other living creatures still holding on in isolated pockets of safety. Greg's heart hammered. He remembered feeling that same constricted fear just 6 months ago, not in a raging fire, but in the cramped metal corridors of a submarine. Confinement and smoke were twin brothers when you were gasping for air. He'd survived then. Could he help this forest? And all who lived here survive now. "Let's go," he barked, running after David. 6 months prior, Greg Miller, a retired Navy lieutenant, had returned to his hometown in Upper Pine County. He'd been born and spent his youth there before serving in the North Atlantic, spending years on subs, seeing glacial ice and endless ocean. His old cabin in Creek's End Village had survived. A bit crooked, but a sturdy log home built by his grandfather. His ex-wife, Veronica, had left years ago for the warmer climates down south. She'd left a short note. "I'm tired." Not another word. No address. No phone. Cut ties completely. "Pull yourself together, Greg," he'd told himself, stepping into the empty house for the first time. Dust everywhere, the scent of old wood, and silence. Silence louder than any alarm. He'd called his sister Sarah, hoping for a warm welcome, but got a listless, "Maybe another time? It's a bit cramped here." Yes, she had her own life, kids, a husband, no room for an extra person. "It's fine," Greg had thought then. "I can manage. I'm used to living self-sufficiently." He got a job as an assistant park ranger. Soon, proving his capability, he was made a full ranger. He often remembered how during his night watches underwater he'd dreamed of freedom. No steel walls, just pines, firs, and wide open spaces. Now he had it. But why did he feel so empty inside? Bureaucracy. It's everywhere, Greg. The head ranger, an older gentleman named Mr. Wilson, had told him when he was filling out his hiring paperwork. Paperwork, licenses, detailed maps, and now these fires. Mr. Wilson was a distinguished man, having worked in forest management for many years, seeing both triumphs and setbacks. But lately, looking at the ravaged areas, he grew increasingly somber. "You see, we can't just ignore it. We need to catch those who are setting fires for logging. We need to search, but we're short-staffed." Greg remained silent. He knew volunteers were desperately scarce, and new fires erupted almost weekly. Gradually, Mr. Wilson saw that Greg wasn't easily intimidated. He acted quickly and coolly. "Navy discipline," the head ranger would say respectfully. That's how Greg got his first expedition with David Cooper. David was a quiet, reserved man. Light brown hair, pale eyes, but beneath his simple exterior lay a chasm of loss. "My wife passed away," he'd said softly one evening by the fire during a patrol. Greg listened intently. "Helen, she loved growing flowers. pigeons. She fought her illness for a year and a half. I sold my car, the land I had outside town, but I couldn't save her. David turned away, as if embarrassed by his frankness. Her daughter, Olivia, just a girl, went to live with her birth father. She doesn't call me. Greg nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. So much pain. A familiar story. His own soul was torn too. Not death, but betrayal, abandonment, emptiness. Thus began the strange friendship between two lonely men who asked no unnecessary questions, but always understood each other's silence. Every day, the fires grew fiercer. Greg and David submitted requests for helicopter support, but rescue resources were stretched thin, all directed to the major blazes. The forest burned, animals perished. Our only option is to look for new ignitions and put out small fires, David explained, wiping sweat from his brow. But when the sky is this dry, we're helpless, Greg. They roamed their assigned sectors, tasting the constant acrid bitterness of smoke. How long will this last? If only it would rain, Greg thought. One day, while patrolling near the wetlands beyond Shula Creek, Greg felt someone watching him from behind charred bushes. He turned and saw a huge wolf. The gray animal stood motionless, only its yellow eyes glowing in the smoky haze. His ranger instinct screamed, "Caution!" But deep down, something stirred with pity and admiration. The wolf looked exhausted. Its fur was blackened in places with soot, its left ear torn. But its eyes— "Hey there, buddy," Greg said softly. The wolf tilted its head, as if hesitating. Then it retreated, darting deeper into the woods. Greg followed, stepping carefully between smoking black patches. That's how he stumbled upon a clearing where a female wolf with inflamed eyes sat beside several adolescent pups and two tiny cubs. Their condition was grave. They were emaciated, feverish, surrounded by smoky air. "Damn, you have nowhere to go," Greg whispered, and suddenly he felt as if the father wolf was pleading with his eyes. Help! Far out at the edge of the wetlands stood a hunting cabin Greg and David had recently inspected. He gestured to the animal. "Follow me." Not knowing if the wolves would understand, he walked ahead. Every so often he looked back. The family followed, not approaching too closely, but not lagging either. The cubs whimpered pitifully. When they arrived, Greg opened the low door, rapped on it with his rifle butt to check if anyone was hiding inside. He tossed in a couple of his hard crackers, a piece of jerky. Then he brought a bucket of water from a nearby wetland spring and placed it deep inside the cabin. "Drink. Wait it out until it rains. If it rains," he said, realizing he was talking to wolves as if they were people. The wolves cautiously sniffed. The female took the first step inside. The father wolf lifted his muzzle to Greg as if to say, "Thank you." And in that moment, Greg felt an inexplicable sensation, as if something had connected him to the pack. He left them there and walked away, feeling a strange sense of relief. 3 more agonizing days passed. The fires raged on, but suddenly the sky turned a leaden gray. First, scattered drops fell, then a clap of thunder and a downpour. It was as if a dam had broken in the heavens. Water cascaded down roads, washing everything in its path. People wept with joy. Housewives ran out with buckets. Villagers cheered, "Rain! A savior!" Greg and David, exhausted and soaked to the bone but happy, could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The fire slowly subsided. "We made it," David said, looking up at the sky. Greg mentally thanked fate and remembered the wolves. Now the pack also had a chance at survival. Late summer turned cold and damp. One night, As Greg sat by the kerosene lamp, there was a timid knock at the window. He thought, "David? At this hour?" He opened the door. There stood his niece, Kira, wet, shivering, and gaunt. A distinctly rounded belly was visible beneath her thin coat. "Kira?" Greg immediately remembered his sister Sarah had mentioned a daughter who'd gotten into trouble. Was this that very trouble? "Come in quickly. Take off your things. Warm up." Kira entered, teeth chattering. Greg took her wet coat, gave her a warm sweater and old wool boots. "How did this happen?" he asked gently when she, wrapped in a blanket, was drinking hot tea. Instead of answering, Kira just sobbed. Later, after a bit more composure, she told him the whole truth. "Mom kicked me out, said I was shaming the family, sent Mark. He promised to marry me, but his parents didn't want that kind of daughter-in-law, and now he—" Tears streamed down the girl's pale cheeks. Greg listened, and fury boiled within him. How could anyone do that? Abandon a pregnant woman and her own mother kick her out? "Kira, darling, calm down," he said quietly. "Stay with me. We'll figure something out." He remembered how he himself had once hoped for support and hadn't received it. "We won't let that happen again," he firmly decided. Kira stayed in Greg's cabin. Neighbors whispered, asking who she was. Greg answered curtly, "My niece," and people shook their heads. But they soon grew accustomed to it, seeing that the house became cozier. Kira cooked meals, washed her uncle's clothes, and helped in the garden. Time passed. Her belly grew. Kira struggled with household chores. Greg called a doctor from the county seat. David visited more and more often to bring groceries or hear news. "When's the baby due?" he'd ask softly, looking away. "Next month," Kira would say, her face clouding. She didn't know what awaited her. Greg encouraged her, but he felt a nest of fear in the young woman's heart. One day, Kira returned from the local midwife to find Greg distraught and angry. He was sitting at the table, fists clenched. "What happened, Uncle Greg?" He exhaled. "Mark's getting married. To someone else. The wedding's happening right now." Kira went pale. "But he promised." She clutched her hands to her belly. Pain flared in her eyes. "Did he really lie?" Her voice broke into a whisper. Greg jumped up, grabbed his car keys. "I'm going." "Where?" "To the wedding. I'll give him a celebration he'll never forget." Kira didn't stop him. She merely sank onto a stool as if her strength had left her. Greg sped along the bumpy road. Ahead, beyond a tall fence, loomed a mansion. The clinking of glasses and laughter of guests were already audible. He got out of the car and walked to the gate. The guards, seeing a stranger, tried to stop him. "Where do you think you're going?" "In. Personal business." Greg pushed one of them aside. He walked directly under the archway into the courtyard, where the groom, bride, and guests were dancing. Flowers, garlands, a buffet, all in rich splendor. The groom, Mark himself, well-groomed in an expensive suit, looked startled when he saw the grim-faced man with the resolute gaze. "You? Why are you here?" Mark asked. "To ask why you deceived my niece." Greg restrained his fury, clenching his fists. The guests began to whisper. The bride clutched Mark's arm. Relatives gathered. Someone was already calling security. "Get out of here, troublemaker," Mark's father exclaimed. "Consider this a declaration of war if you don't take responsibility for this child." Anger blazed in Greg's eyes. "And you, Mark, at least have the courage to acknowledge your fatherhood." Mark was silent. Security descended on Greg. A scuffle began. Someone grabbed his shoulders. Someone twisted his arm. Greg knew if he fought now, he would only harm Kira. He could be arrested. And what would happen to the girl then? With a heavy heart, he stopped resisting. He was thrown out of the gate. The small door slammed shut. Fireworks soared into the sky. The guests' cheers faded. Greg stood by his car, clenching his jaw. Bastard, he thought, looking at the decorated house. Returning home, Greg found Kira gone, and not just her. Her belongings, baby diapers, and a hospital bag were missing. On the table, a brief note. "Forgive me, Uncle. I can't live like this." He frantically called his sister in the county town. She screamed, "I don't know anything. Let her sort it out herself." David was the first to rush to help. Soon, neighbors gathered too, some with sympathy, some out of curiosity. Everyone started combing the surroundings. Dusk was falling, and rain began to drizzle again. "We need to go to the wetlands," Greg suddenly said, a chill from a bad premonition running through him. "I have a bad feeling about that place." "I'm with you," David immediately replied. Night covered the forest in dampness, with uneven flickers of fog. Greg and David made their way along treacherous paths, lighting their way with flashlights. In places, the water reached their knees. And then ahead, Greg saw two yellow sparks, the eyes of a wolf, the same old seasoned one. "Easy," David whispered, grabbing his rifle. But the wolf didn't attack. It turned and, limping, ran along the path, looking back at the men. Greg understood. "He's leading us." "Let's go," he said simply to David. About 15 minutes of tense pursuit brought them to a wide clearing by a dark bog. And there, in the uncertain moonlight, they saw her. Kira sat on the ground, leaning against the gnarled trunk of a birch tree. Her hands clutched a baby. "She's already given birth?" Greg thought. Wolves surrounded them. The female, a couple of young animals, sitting in a semicircle as if guarding the young woman. Perhaps they were preventing her from taking a fatal step, drowning in the bog or freezing. "Kira!" Greg approached cautiously, extending a hand. David raised his flashlight, illuminating the girl's pale face. She looked with an unfocused gaze. Her lips trembled. "I wanted to go there." She nodded toward the treacherous surface of the bog. "No one needs me." The infant whimpered, demanding warmth and milk. The wolves howled softly, but neither attacked nor retreated. It seemed they were protecting her from herself. "I couldn't, you understand? They wouldn't let me," Kira whispered, tears falling onto the baby's blanket. Greg squeezed her hand. "Sweetheart, it's all over now. Let's go home." David approached, took a blanket, and gently swaddled the baby. "This is your world now, Kira, your child." His voice trembled. "We won't leave you." Greg turned to the wolf pack, still sitting nearby, pressing close to the mother wolf. The alpha, that same gray wolf, looked up at the human. Greg felt a surge of gratitude. He wanted to say, "Thank you, friend." He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of appreciation. The wolf slowly wagged its tail, then led the pack away. They vanished into the undergrowth, merging with the night forest. A thought pierced Greg's heart. They are stronger and more loyal than some people. Several months passed. Autumn gave way to early winter. 2 new guests had settled into Greg's home, Kira and her son, Nathan. He was born strong and healthy, though prematurely. At first, Kira was withdrawn, depressed, but a child changes many things. Now she laughed when Nathan tugged her hair and quietly sang lullabies. Greg watched his niece with a warm smile. One morning he found her with a mop in the kitchen while Nathan sweetly snored in his crib. "Remember when you used to mop floors when you were tiny?" Greg grinned. Kira paused for a moment. "Uncle Greg, I feel like this is the first time I've ever been home," she said with an uncertain smile. David visited them more and more often. Sometimes he'd bring firewood, sometimes meat or fish, or he'd fix the old television. Kira noticed that this somber ranger often stood by the crib looking at Nathan with a certain tenderness. Sometimes they would talk heart to heart. "Forgive me for asking, but you lost your wife, didn't you?" Kira began timidly. "Yes, and my stepdaughter. She doesn't want to know me," David replied with bitterness. "But a person can't live without loving." Kira lowered her eyes, feeling something warm inside her at his words. Time went on. The neighbors whispered and chuckled, saying, "Well, they must be getting together already." Kira froze with embarrassment. But David was gallant and patient. They grew closer, little by little. First lunched together, then shared walks with the stroller, then digging potatoes at Greg's place. Something real was blossoming. Meanwhile, Kira's mother, Sarah, remained in the county town. She didn't call. Only once did Greg receive a note from her in which she, rather dryly, asked, "Is everything all right? I hope you're not hungry?" He didn't reply. He considered such behavior a strange mix of shame and pride. One day, when Kira had grown stronger, Greg went to town on errands and ran into Sarah herself in a store. She barely greeted him, looking downcast, while her husband, Kira's stepfather, rudely said, "So, your girl had her baby. Hope it's not on our dime." Greg clenched his fists, but remained silent. "They're family, but what kind of family?" he thought bitterly. Winter was approaching. Outside, the wind howled. That evening, Greg dreamed by the stove that he would soon build an extension for Kira and her child, so they would have more space. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Standing on the doorstep was Mark, the very man who had abandoned Kira. "Why are you here?" Greg asked in a stern tone. Mark looked anxious, haggard. "I wanted to talk." Kira came out, holding Nathan to her chest. She looked at Mark as if he were a stranger. He reached out to the child. "He's my son." "He is," Kira confirmed coldly. A long pause followed. Greg didn't intervene. He just stood nearby, ready to kick Mark out at any moment. "My parents forced me to marry," Mark began, "and now I'm divorcing. I can't live with that woman. I realized I love you, Kira." The girl straightened abruptly. "Where were you all these months when I was dying of fear and hunger?" "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I was scared. My father threatened to disinherit me." Kira laughed bitterly. "And now he's not threatening you?" Mark sighed. "I want to take you and our son. I have money. I'll make everything right." Greg saw tears streaming down Kira's cheeks, but they were tears of resentment and even contempt. "It's too late, Mark. I don't believe you. Go." The baby started crying. Mark froze, bewildered. "Is the boy sick? Can I help?" "No." Kira hugged her son tighter. "Go back to your family, where you came from." Mark flustered, tried to say more words, but was helpless against Kira's gaze. Then he looked at Greg. "Can I come back? Fix things?" "You should have fixed things sooner, young man," Greg said. "You're a guest here, or not even a guest anymore." Mark slumped, turned, and went out into the blizzard. The door slammed shut. The house was so quiet that the crackling of the logs in the stove was audible. With each passing day, David found more reasons to visit Kira. He fixed the roof, carried water from the well, sometimes sat with Nathan to let the young woman rest. One winter day, as a snowstorm raged outside, David pulled out a small box. "Kira," he said, blushing, "I don't know how these things are supposed to be done, but here, take this." Inside the box was a simple silver ring. Kira burst into tears and laughter simultaneously. "Are you proposing to me?" David nodded. "Yes. Maybe not right away when the baby is a little older, but I want to take care of you both, my whole life." She remembered how, not long ago, she had been on the verge of despair, and now before her stood a man who had never abandoned her, who had saved her in her darkest hour. "I accept," Kira whispered, tears streaming down her face. Greg, who had been watching from behind the stove, came out and hugged them both. His voice filled with joy. This is it, what made life worth living. News of the upcoming wedding spread through the villages and even reached the county seat. Kira's mother, Sarah, was thrown into confusion. Kira is getting married? And to whom? A park ranger? Her husband grumbled, "Let her do what she wants as long as she doesn't bother us." But deep down, both Sarah and the stepfather felt an inexplicable resentment and shame that they had driven their daughter away, and she had managed to build her life without them. In late February, Greg went deep into the woods for firewood. The snow was knee-deep. Evening was approaching, and by the edge of a clearing he saw a wolf, the same one. The gray animal stood, thoughtfully looking at the man. Greg froze, putting down his saw. "Hello, buddy. Long time no see," he said softly. The wolf didn't move, only flattened its ears slightly. Behind him, the female wolf and several young ones were visible. All watched Greg. There was neither aggression nor fear in their gaze, only calm, as if to say, "We're moving on. Everything will be fine." The wolf snorted briefly and moved on through the snowdrifts, melting into the evening twilight. The pack silently slipped after him. Greg felt a warmth in his heart. "They're saying goodbye, going to find a new home," he thought. Kira and David decided against a lavish celebration, but the entire village was eager to help. Someone promised to sew a dress, someone else to bake a wedding cake. Neighbors donated chickens and potatoes. Greg built a small archway by the porch from planks and old decorations. "Let the bride come out and the groom meet her," he laughed, showing the sketch. On the wedding day, in early spring, there was a light frost outside, but the sun was already warming things up. Folk music played in the houses, women prepared the tables. Many guests gathered. Nathan was dressed in a tiny suit. The boy looked around, spinning his head. Kira wore a delicate light dress, fitted to her slender figure. Her face radiated joy. David watched her walk towards him down the makeshift aisle and couldn't tear his eyes away. Tears welled up, but he held them back because he was a man. When the couple exchanged rings and someone shouted, "Kiss the bride!" the crowd applauded joyfully. And then a whisper went through the crowd, "Look, it's Sarah, Kira's mother." Everyone parted, making way for her. Sarah approached her daughter, burying her face in her hands. "Forgive me, you silly girl," she sobbed. Kira stood bewildered, Nathan in her arms babbling something, looking at the unfamiliar woman. "I realized everything," Sarah continued. "Forgive me, I was so harsh. How can I live with this now?" Kira cried, hugging her mother tightly. "Let's never part like this again." She stammered through her tears. Onlookers around them teared up. Make up, make up. Forgive me, too, the stepfather mumbled, approaching awkwardly. Don't hold a grudge, daughter, don't. Kira nodded and sighed through her tears. There's room for everyone in our home. The feast lasted until night, and although everything was homemade, wooden tables outside, furry blankets instead of carpets, samovars, home-cooked food, the atmosphere shone with warmth and sincerity. David took out his guitar, Greg helped with old military songs, neighbors danced. Kira and her mother sat side by side holding hands. Nathan dozed, wrapped in a blanket. Later, when the guests quieted down and the sky lit up with stars, David and Kira stepped out onto the porch. The first snowflakes fell from the sky. Thank you, Kira said softly, leaning into her husband. He touched her hair with his lips. For what? For everything. For Nathan. For our new life. In the distant window, Greg's silhouette was visible. He sat, leaning on his elbows, gazing into the night, somewhere into the vast stretches of the forest. He remembered the wolves, his wife Veronica, his past years of service, and he understood that a new chapter of his life had opened. Around him was everything precious, his niece, her husband, their child, his family, and perhaps someday Veronica would want to return, or perhaps not. Now Greg had purpose, a family, even if not his direct children, but the closest people to him. Several more weeks passed. Winter struck with renewed force. Greg had been out on patrol countless times, checking trappers' snares, stumbling upon fresh wolf tracks, but he hadn't seen the pack. However, one evening, returning home, he noticed some movement in the snow. He approached and saw a gift, a rabbit neatly cornered in a snowdrift, lifeless, but with its fur intact, as if a wolf had caught it but not touched it. Greg looked around. A gray shadow flickered in the twilight. "You're still here?" he asked, almost aloud. But the shadow melted away. A gust of wind scattered the snow. Greg picked up the prize, feeling a warmth inside. He understood that the wolf hadn't forgotten him. Perhaps it was a farewell gesture, or something like, "Thank you, human. You helped us survive." That evening, Greg sat on the porch for a long time, looking at the snowy forest. Inside, Kira was joyful with her husband and child. Kira's mother was still visiting, learning to build a relationship with her grandson. Laughter filled the air, life bubbled over, and somewhere out there, beyond the wetlands, in the lonely expanses, a wolf pack made its way through the snow, finding its path. Spring arrived abruptly. Snowdrifts melted, fields turned green. David and Kira were planning to set up their small cabin on a neighboring plot. Greg promised to help with timber and planks. Head Ranger Wilson presented Greg with a commendation for bravery in fighting fires and helping to save wildlife. Greg merely shrugged in response. "I was just doing my job." In the evening, as the sun's rays played on the rooftops, Greg stepped into the yard and saw Kira and David feeding Nathan porridge, while Kira's mother laughed, trying to catch her grandson, who was crawling away on all fours. "Family," Greg thought warmly. "It's never too late to find your home." At that very moment, a long, mournful wolf howl echoed from the direction of the wetlands. Thin and mysterious. Kira flinched. "Did you hear that, Uncle?" "Yes, I heard it." A smile flashed in Greg's eyes. He felt that the wolves were still nearby, that some inexplicable thread connected them, but let them now be free on the other side of destiny. And he had his land, his family, his faith in the future. And only that wolf's song in the evening air reminds everyone. The strength of life is not in blindly running from fear, but in helping and believing even when everything seems burned to ashes. Thank you for watching. What do you think of this story? Share your thoughts. Your comment is very valuable to us.